She died on a Tuesday, and by Thursday, not a week later, not a month later, Thursday, the bank froze our joint account because my name wasn't on it. I'm standing in the kitchen, still wearing the same shirt I wore to the funeral home, and I'm being told by a 23-year-old on the phone that I cannot access money I deposited for 48 years because the paperwork wasn't structured correctly. That is when it hits you, that grief doesn't wait. Grief doesn't say, give him a few weeks to catch his breath first. Grief comes with a clipboard and a deadline, and it does not care that you are still in the middle of falling apart. I'm 71 years old. I've been a widower for just over 2 years now, and I need to tell you some things that nobody told me because the silence nearly killed me. And I mean that more literally than you might think. Her name was Margaret, Maggie to everyone who loved her, which was a lot of people. 48 years. We got married when I was 23 and she was 22, and neither of us had any idea what we were doing. We figured it out together. We figured out the kids, the money, the house, the holidays, the arguments, the silences, the making up after the silences. We figured all of it out. And somewhere in the process of doing that, we divided life up between us without ever consciously deciding to. She handled the finances. I handled the yard, the cars, anything that required a tool. She knew every password to every account we had, every insurance policy number, our doctor's direct line, which neighbor had our spare key. I knew how to change a timing belt and which circuit breaker controlled the back bedroom. That is what a long marriage becomes, and nobody tells you until it's too late that this beautiful, functional division of labor is quietly building a trap. When she passed, it was her heart, very fast, not prolonged. We were at least spared that. When she passed, I discovered that half of my own life was a mystery to me. Not because she hid anything, because we trusted each other so completely that we never needed to. Her knowledge lived in her head, and her head was gone. I spent 3 days trying to figure out the login for our electric bill. 3 days. I have a master's degree. I ran a manufacturing operation for 22 years. I could not find the login for the electric bill. And somewhere around hour 6 of that search, I sat down on the kitchen floor and I cried in a way I had not cried since I was a child. Not because of the bill, because the bill made it real in a way the funeral hadn't. She was the one who knew the password, and she was never going to tell me. This is the cruelest trick of a long marriage. And I want you to sit with this for a second. You each become an expert in your half of life. Over decades, without realizing it, you specialize. And when one person leaves, the others standing in a house they co-built but only halfway understand. You didn't fail to pay attention. You trusted. You trusted completely. And now that trust has left a gap you don't even know the edges of yet. There's a man I know from the grief support group I eventually joined. I'll get to that. His name is Gerald, 73, retired school principal from outside of Columbus, Ohio. Gerald's wife handled every piece of their financial life for 41 years. Every investment, every account, every automatic payment. When she died, Gerald discovered there was a life insurance policy he didn't know existed, a small IRA she had opened in 1994 that had grown substantially, and a credit card with a balance he didn't know about. He also discovered at 73 that he had no idea what a Medicare Part D supplement plan even was, let alone which one he was on. Gerald is not a stupid man. Gerald is a man who trusted his wife. And then Gerald was alone in a bureaucratic world that does not slow down for grief. I want to talk about money for a minute because this part is genuinely urgent and nobody in the grief space talks about it clearly enough. When your spouse dies, your household income does not get cut in half. It typically drops by about 40%, while your expenses stay at roughly 90% of what they were. The mortgage doesn't shrink. The utilities don't shrink. The property taxes don't shrink. And here's the thing that blindsided me: the Social Security rules. I was leaving over $1,200 a month on the table because I filed at the wrong time. Not the wrong time by years, by a few months. And not one person at the Social Security office volunteered that information to me. I had to find it in a forum online at 2 a.m, posted by a retired accountant in Florida who had been through the same thing. $1,200 a month. Think about what that number means over 5 years, over 10 years. If you are in this situation right now, or you know someone who is, please talk to someone who specializes in survivor benefits before you file anything. The rules are specific, and they matter enormously. Now, the loneliness. People think the loneliness peaks at the funeral. It doesn't. The funeral is crowded. The funeral is people bringing food and holding your hand and telling you stories about Maggie that make you laugh even when you're crying. The funeral is too much human contact almost. The grief gets diluted by presence. The loneliness peaks at month 9. That's when I discovered I had not spoken a full sentence out loud to another human being in 11 days. I know that sounds extreme, but the kids had their lives, the friends had drifted, and I was alone in a house where the loudest sound was the refrigerator hum. One morning I drove to the coffee shop down the road just to have a reason to speak, and when the young woman behind the counter asked me what I wanted, my voice cracked. Like a teenager. Like a 16-year-old boy whose voice is still deciding what it wants to be. I was 70 years old, and my voice cracked ordering a medium coffee because I had not used it in over a week. I want to tell you something about what happens to couples socially that I did not understand until I lived it. When you are a couple, you are invited as a couple. The dinner parties, the holiday gatherings, the neighbors' cookout, you are a unit. People include you as a unit. And when one of you dies, you become the odd number. Not deliberately, not cruelly. People don't sit down and consciously decide to stop calling. But the dynamic shifts. The seating arrangements feel awkward. The conversation needs to be managed differently. And slowly, almost invisibly, the invitations thin out and then stop. The friends you shared for 30 years, the couples you vacationed with, the people who knew both of you, they don't know what to do with just you. So they do nothing. And you sit in your house and you wonder what you did wrong. And the answer is nothing. You just changed shapes on them, and they didn't know how to adjust. My doctor, this is the part that really got my attention. My doctor told me my blood pressure had spiked 30 points in the 4 months after Maggie passed. 30 points. He sat me down, and he used the phrase widower syndrome, which I had never heard before. and it's a real thing, clinically documented. The loss of a long-term partner creates measurable physiological decline. Your sleep degrades, your immune system weakens, your cardiovascular markers shift in dangerous directions. There's a reason widowers have significantly elevated mortality risk in the first year. It's not just sadness. Your body is processing an absence that it was not designed to handle. The person who kept you regulated, who made you eat dinner, who woke you up in the night when your breathing changed, who noticed before you did that you'd been quiet for too long. That person is gone, and your body knows. I want to tell you about the grief support group because I almost didn't go. I went once, hated it, left at the break, and only came back because a neighbor of mine, Dennis, 66, former contractor, the kind of man who has never once in his life voluntarily discussed his feelings. Dennis called me and said he'd been going for 3 months and it had helped him more than he expected, and would I give it another try with him? So I went back. And what I found there was not what I expected. I expected sad people in a circle talking about how much they missed their wives. And there was some of that. But mostly what I found was 12 men in various stages of rebuilding their own competence, teaching each other. Gerald from Columbus was in that group. There was a retired firefighter named Ray who had learned to cook from YouTube and was making genuinely impressive food by month 4. There was a man named Howard, 78 years old, who showed up at the first meeting unable to do his own laundry and by spring was helping other men in the group figure out their Medicare Part D supplement options because he'd become something of an expert. There is a particular kind of dignity that gets rebuilt in a room full of men who have all lost the same thing and are refusing to stop. I need to say something about the adult children, and I'm going to say it carefully, because I know some of you watching this are adult children, not widowers, and I want you to hear this the right way. When a parent loses a spouse, there is a natural instinct in children to protect that parent, to step in, to take over. And some of that is love, and some of that is fear, and some of that is the discomfort of watching a parent be vulnerable in a way you've never seen before. But what often happens, and I lived this, and every man in that support group lived this, is that the children start treating the surviving parent as if they are fragile, as if they are already slightly incompetent. They speak a little more slowly. They check in with an undertone of worry that feels like monitoring. They take over decisions that the parent is still entirely capable of making. And I want to tell you, as someone who was on the receiving end of it, that there is nothing that strips away your will to rebuild faster than being treated like you've already lost your mind. I know my kids meant well. I know they were scared. But at 70, having just lost the person who had made me feel competent and whole for nearly 5 decades, the last thing I needed was to be managed. What I needed was to be trusted. What I needed was someone to hand me the problem and let me solve it. There is a thing I call a departure binder. I started building mine after the first 6 months, once I had figured out the chaos I had inherited from Maggie's death through no fault of hers. I rebuilt everything. Every account consolidated into my name. Automatic bill pay set up. Medical power of attorney updated. Will completely rewritten to reflect current reality. And then I documented all of it. Every login, every account number, every insurance policy, every contact, in one physical binder that lives in the same drawer as my passport. Not because I think I'm going anywhere soon, because I watched what happened when that information disappeared with Maggie, and I will not leave that to my kids. I have heard people call it an emergency binder, a legacy binder, an estate planning document. Call it whatever you want. Build it. If you are married right now and you do not have something like this, you are one phone call away from bureaucratic hell during what will already be the hardest stretch of your life. This is not morbid. This is love. I learned more practical survival skills between the ages of 70 and 72 than I learned in my entire adult life before that. How to meal prep, for one, because I spent 6 months eating cereal for dinner, and not because I couldn't afford anything else, but because in 48 years of marriage, I had never once been the person responsible for a full meal, and the shame of not knowing how sat on me heavier than I expected. How to keep a house from quietly falling apart, the small maintenance things Maggie would have caught before they became problems. How to call my children and make it clear from the first sentence that this is not a welfare check, that I'm calling because I want to talk, not because something is wrong. There was a Tuesday afternoon, about 14 months in. I was standing in the hardware store, staring at a faucet handle that had broken in a way I didn't understand, and I must have been standing there longer than I realized because a man came up beside me. His name was Carl, 68 years old, retired electrician, still had the kind of handshake that tells you exactly who a person is. He looked at the handle, looked at me, and said, "Come on, I'll show you." His wife had handled all the household repairs for years, he told me as we walked the aisle. He'd been widowed at 64. He knew the look on my face. He picked out the right part in about 30 seconds, explained the fix in plain language, and then said, and I think about this often, he said, "The first year you survive. The second year you start to understand what you're surviving. And the third year you start to build something new." I had been inside the second year, and he was right. I was just starting to understand. I'm not going to tell you that I'm fine. That would be dishonest, and I'm too old for dishonesty. I miss her every single day. I still reach for her in the morning sometimes, that half-asleep moment before the day fully arrives. I still buy the brand of crackers she liked, even though I don't particularly like them myself. The house still has more of her in it than of me, and I don't know yet if that's something I'll change. Grief at this age, after a marriage this long, doesn't resolve. You don't heal from it so much as you grow around it, the way a tree grows around something lodged in its side. It becomes part of your shape. But you still grow. That's the part they forget to tell you. You still grow. If any part of this landed somewhere real for you, if you recognized yourself or someone you love in any of this, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And if you want to tell me your story or ask me something I didn't cover, leave it in the comments. I read them, every single one. Subscribe if you want to keep talking. I've got more to say.